Welcome everyone, I am Marcus Bravo, brand ambassador at Joorney, and today we have a very special guest. We will be diving into business immigration options for executives moving into the United States. We will explore the ins and outs of the L-1 and EB-1C visa, their benefits, eligibility requirements, and much more. My guest today is Donald Garner. He is a top U.S. business immigration attorney from Chicago and the founder of the LLM Law Group. We had an enlightening conversation full of valuable insight for you. So, let's get started. Hello, Don. A pleasure to have you here. We're going to be covering a few things, so I'm not going to push you to introduce yourself too much, but if you want to give us a couple of words about your experience in your life and whatever you want to share with our audience before we get into the meat.
Absolutely. Thanks, Marcus, for having me here today for the Journey Business Webinar. My name is Don Garner. I'm an immigration attorney. I've run my own practice now for 23 years here in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. I focus on business immigration and also family-based immigration. Helping people with all kinds of visas, green cards, and U.S. citizenship. I've been very fortunate to travel, study, and work in many different countries in the world. Picked up a few languages along the way, married to a triple citizen, as well as having 3 daughters who are also triple citizens. So look forward to talking with you today about the L-1A intracompany transfer visa, the L-1B specialized knowledge visa, and how you go about getting a green card.
That's what we really want to find out. Like I as a brand ambassador of Journey, I know my way around a little bit about the L1, which is a very common visa for executives. But I really wanted you to help us understand the difference between the L1A and L1B, how that turns into an EB1 maybe, what are the requirements, what are the limitations, and like you said, like how do we turn that into a green card so myself as an executive can actually continue my life in the US? Because after a while, I mean, you spend a few years there, right? You start learning the life, living the life, and maybe you want to stay there with your family and kids. You found already schools, and we're going to find out all of those details and to get there. So let's start with the beginning. I'm an executive abroad, right? I live in a different country, and the company I'm working in the United States will love to have me there over. So how do I start this journey? What do I do?
Sure. Well, Marcus, one, we'd love to have you here in the United States, you and your family. Um, but as an executive, there are several different visa options available for you. There's an alphabet of visas, an A visa for a diplomat, a B1 for a business visitor, B2 for tourists. It goes on and on. Um, Typically for executives, you're looking at a few different options, and ultimately will settle on the L1 visa as being the best one, at least most commonly. But for example, you could be looking at an O1 visa of extraordinary ability, an H-1B visa for a specialty worker, which has a cap or limited number of visas per year. And so it turns out to be a lottery to be eligible to apply for those. You have an E visa, which is broken down between E1 treaty trader and E2 treaty investor. So a list of about 35 different countries around the world that have an agreement with the United States treaty that says that you can apply and come to the United States based on that treaty. Similarly, NAFTA or the USMCA allows for Canadian and Mexican executives to come to the United States on a TN visa. And then finally, you have E3 visas specifically for Australian. citizens and nationals. But you, Marcus, you may not come from one of those countries. You are an executive. You're looking to uh, open a U.S. office or come to an already established U.S. office in order to uh, open up the U.S. market for your company. So, as an executive, they send you to the United States. And typically, the L-1 visa is going to be the best visa for that. And the L-1 visa itself is broken down into two different types. There's the L-1A visa for executives and managers, and then there is the L-1B visa, which is for specialized knowledge workers.
That sorry, that specialized, is it? How do you really define that? Like how what will you consider as a specialized? Do you have any examples?
So, specialized knowledge can be about a product that the company produces, an actual process. There are many different specialized knowledge types of workers. Typically, though, it's reserved for more technical types of workers.
Got it. And one more question before we move on, because I really want to know, especially the difference between L1A and L1B. Is this a process that I do as on my own, or is the company needs to sort of sponsor or organize it as a company?
Sure. So ultimately, it's the U.S. company that is
Uh-huh.
sponsoring you to transfer to the United States. There are certain eligibility requirements that we can talk about here shortly, but ultimately it is not, you cannot self petition for
Got
an
it.
L-1 visa. You have to have a U.S. company sponsor.
Great. So, yep, I get that now. So L1A, L1B, where do I fit?
Excuse me?
And between the L1A and L1B now, like how do I fit as an executive? How we take the journey from now on? Now that we understand that there's different L visas that we can apply, what happened next after the company helped us out to sponsor my move to the US? What happened next? How this move?
Right. Well, first of all, you want to, as far as make the decision
Hmm.
on opening an office or transferring you to the US. So if that decision has been made, typically what I recommend is a feasibility study. Um, each business is unique and there is research that needs to be done in the United States that will show to a foreign company this is the best place for various reasons to come to the United States. I might mention that your company, Joorney, does fantastic feasibility studies because they work closely with the company as you need to in order to create a feasibility study to go over the different factors. Not only is location going to be an important factor. Um, not everybody comes to New York City to open a business. A lot of people will come to Chicago because you can get anywhere in the United States in 4 hours from Chicago. Um, so there are a lot of different factors that go into it. Some of the other factors are, for example, what types of materials, tech, labor that you need. So you may want to pick a city that has a lot of universities that can produce local talent for you to hire. You may want to be near your material suppliers. So go where they are at.
And that
How
count,
much is it going? I'm sorry, go ahead, Marcus.
sorry, that count into the feasibility of well, the whole thing happening, right? Like, how do you choose the location? All of these things, they sort of help you out in the case of being the one opening the office, right?
That's right. That's right. Um, that's again from perhaps a new office perspective. There's also, of course, cases where there's already a U.S. office established. Feasibility studies typically are done for U.S. offices because you need to find out, is it feasible for us to open a U.S. office? And a lot of different factors go into that: legal factors, market feasibility factors, and again, as I mentioned, how much it's going to cost, and where the office should be located in the United States. But once that decision has been made to either open a U.S. office or send you as an executive to the U.S. Office, then there's a few things that you need to figure out as far as whether or not you meet the eligibility requirements. So, first and foremost, you, Marcus,
Hmm.
have to have worked for the foreign company for at least 1 year in the
Okay.
last 3 years in order to even be eligible to apply for an L-1 visa.
So even if I
Okay.
worked, let's say 5 years ago, I worked for a year with a company, then we stop, and then they want to hire me again, they cannot hire me to go and open the office unless I have worked for the last 3 years, right?
That's right. So
Uh-huh.
I mean, this happens a lot of times for clients of mine, is that they will bring back a past executive. Um, and if it has been more than 3 years and that executive has not been working for either an affiliate or a branch or anything of that connection to the parent company or the foreign company, then it's not going to work until you've got the 12 months in a 3 year period.
3 years. Got it.
The other thing is that's very important is that there must be a connection. Okay. So, and that connection must be ongoing while the foreign national is here in the United States. So, let's take an example of a client of mine that had a company in Canada and moved the entire operations down to Florida in the United States. That would not qualify for a U.S. visa, even though he was an executive, he was president of the company. He had worked for at least a year in the last 3 years. The problem is he did not have a foreign operation anymore. So there
Uh-huh.
was really nothing to transfer from. Okay. So not only does there still need to be a foreign company operating, but also you have to have a legal connection. So that can be a parent subsidiary relationship, and it can work both ways. The US company could be the parent, and it's the foreign company that's the subsidiary. But more often than not, it's the foreign company that is the parent. They set up a subsidiary in the United States and send their foreign national to open up the U.S. office. It could be a branch, kind of like maybe a bank branch or something like that. It could be an affiliate, all right? So it could be in the sense of a little bit looser than an actual subsidiary. When I talk about an affiliate, it could be something that works and has a permanent agreement to work with the parent company. So, all in all, you have to have not only that year of working with the company in the last 3 years, you have to have an official type of connection between the parent company and the U.S. company. And then finally, you have to meet the actual eligibility requirements to qualify as an executive or a manager. So, what is that? I mean, more often than not, the CEO of a company, you think of that as an executive or the vice president of sales or something like that. Usually it's some person that has several direct subordinates. Okay.
Okay.
One-hand companies have a very hard time with L-1 visas. One, because if they leave the United States, who's running the foreign operation? Okay,
Mhm.
they're in the US. Two is the government really does not like one-man US offices because you're being the president, you're being the secretary, being the director of sales. You're having several different positions
It's a
in the
one-man
United
band.
States. Yeah,
So it
I'm
doesn't. So
sorry, say again.
no, no, no. I was just saying it's just like a one-man band. You're trying to do everything yourself, and that's not going to
Right.
help into your being eligible.
No,
So
and that's the biggest issue for foreign companies setting up a U.S. office is that they want to keep costs low. So they will send over usually a director of sales to be the CEO of the U.S. operation. And in order to be approved, you have to show not only that you are an executive in your home country, okay? Typically, that shows like an organizational or personnel chart with several people under you. But the business plan for the United States has to show a plan for the next 5 years that you are not going to be alone in the United States, that you are going to have people directly under you, as opposed to, as you say, being a one-man band.
now, when there, I know there's some visas that they require companies to hire uh, nationals of the United States, right? Is this part of the L1? Like, if you open a business and you have this plan, do you need to hire people like nationals of the US, or can you bring more people from abroad? Is there any sort of legal requirement there?
There's no requirement when a foreign company opens a U.S. company to send their foreign nationals to run the U.S. company. In fact, a lot of foreign companies will ultimately hire U.S. citizens or nationals, permanent residents, for example,
Mhm.
um, to run their U.S. operations because they've been in the U.S. They're familiar with the way the U.S. runs. And that is one thing that I see a lot for L1 executives is there is a culture shock from whether or not they come from something relatively close, like say Western Europe, to something that is completely different. Maybe a small country in Asia, for example, or even in South America or in Africa. When these executives come to the United States, there's a completely different way of doing business. The pace usually moves a lot faster than what they're used to. And plus, they're trying to set up a U.S. office, hire people, and it's a lot on that person's plate. Plus, they usually bring their family, so the spouse and the kids are not happy being uprooted from from their home where
Yeah.
all their friends are to come to this new country. Maybe English is not their first language, and a lot of times it's not. And so there's a real adjustment that goes on for executives and their families when coming to the United States, which is why it's important when you come to the US is to do the research beforehand. And to try to find out. For example, there are cultural associations, there are business associations. For example, I'll just take France as an example. You have a French American Chamber of Commerce in a lot of different cities. And that can serve as a way to help you transition in a city where there are other foreign nationals that can provide you with information like, oh, you go shop here for a baby seat, or for example, you want to go eat here because it's got good food. These types of things
All the
that
little.
any
Mhm.
tourist has to deal with, and that sometimes you can't just find online by saying, what is the best restaurant or what is the best baby store.
Absolutely. And actually taking a little step back into the whole conversation, I wanted to ask you, the L1 A and B are applicable for any country? Do you need to be in certain? Because I know that a lot of visas that they respect a treaty with the US, right? But with the
Right.
L1 A, L1B, do we need to be from certain countries, or it can be from anywhere in the world?
As I mean, there are certain countries that the United States does not allow
Yeah.
people to come from based on security
Hmm.
issues. Um, but no, there is no requirement that you come from a certain country. I've been very fortunate over the last 23 years to provide services to executives from over 90 countries.
Oh
And
wow.
it's very interesting. They don't all come from Europe. They don't all come from Asia or South America. It's a nice mix. But ultimately the goal is the same, is to expand the foreign country's presence into one of the most important markets of the world, the United States.
Absolutely. And what you were talking just now, right? You were saying about, well, it's sort of a shock for people, not just with the work, but moving the family, finding a school, the place to eat. Um, so obviously you're looking at we're trying to look at the bright side, right? Because obviously it is a whole adventure that eventually, hopefully, it will be great for everybody who takes this route. But what happened with the benefits? Like, so what do you earn beside getting to work in the US? Is there any pluses or any benefits that you get as an eligible applicant for the L1?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think a lot of executives that come to the United States look at this as the culmination of their career, to be able to go to one of the most important markets in the world and to take the reins of a company uh, with some direction from the parent company. I mean, it kind of depends on the culture of the company. It depends on the individual themselves. But for a lot of families, yes, there is a bit of a culture shock, but it's also an adventure. And I have found that the majority of executives who come here to either open a U.S. office or to be transferred to the United States ultimately will stay or seek to stay permanently in the United States. And a lot of times, the biggest factor are the kids. You have university opportunities here in the United States, like a Harvard, those types of places that you don't have outside of the United States. A lot of times, the executives who come here are able to maintain the friendships and relationships that they have in their country of origin, but open up a whole new group of friends and relations, business partners here in the United States. Um, so it's something that you're also able to really, if you're opening the U.S. office, is it kind of becomes your baby, in the sense that you can grow that in the, in the way that you think as an executive it should be grown. And that's an exciting opportunity for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Like you said, it's an adventure. Now, when you apply, right? Because we're talking about the executive, the L1A. Is it too much different to apply between L1A and L1B, or are they very, very similar?
Same exact process. It's as I said before, it's a U.S. company that is sponsoring you for the transfer. And essentially, what the U.S. company will do is prepare a petition for that person, and that's a petition that is used for most all non-immigrant applications through the Form I-129, uh, which is a petition for a non-immigrant worker. And you show through the supporting materials and the business plan what it is that the company is going to be doing here in the United States, as well as what the executive is going to be doing here in the United States. And if that petition is approved, then the approval is transmitted to the U.S. consulate or embassy, excuse me, the U.S. consulate or embassy in your country of origin, so that you may then apply for a visa and obtain a visa in your passport, so a visa stamp,
Hmm.
and then come to the United States and begin working. Um, One of the biggest problems that we saw during COVID was not necessarily the delays of the approval process here in the United States. Rather, it was the delays in being able to get an appointment at the embassy or
Okay.
consulate in your country of origin. That that I don't want to say has been completely resolved,
But it's getting
but the
better.
U.S. Department of State has done a very good job at reducing those time frames to be able to wait for an appointment. And you're not actually restricted to going to your country of origin. You can typically go to any country in the world that processes L-1 visas. So let's say, for example, that you're in Canada or you're in Australia or some, any other country besides the United States, and you get approved for an L-1 visa. I mean, a lot of times these executives, they're already
Already
traveling to
somewhere else.
different
Yeah.
countries, right? And the U.S. they're being transferred there because they did a good job at opening or running the U.S. office wherever they were at then. And so that's one of the nice things. For example, the E visa, the treaty visa that I mentioned before,
Hmm.
you all always have to do it in the country of origin because the treaty is with that country, you see. Whereas the doesn't have a country restriction. So, meaning that you could go theoretically to any country and apply there. Just make sure that you have the correct visa for that country and that you're prepared to wait for about a week because that's how long it takes to get your visa stamp.
That's what I was gonna ask you next. The times, right? Since the moment that the company says, like, you know what, Marcus, we're very interested with you coming and joining us here, or to open our
Right.
operations somewhere else. So how long this process takes? Because I mean, I always.
Sure, sure. Um, Generally, about the fastest that you could expect. okay, uh, would be if I'm contacted by an executive and they say, okay, we want, I need to move quickly to the US to open a US office. Oh, excuse me. I would say with the preparation time needed for preparing the application, submitting the application, and paying an extra fee, and I'll get into that in just a bit,
Mhm.
to guarantee a fast return from the government. And assuming there is a visa appointment wherever, whatever embassy or consulate, the minimum you're looking at is about 6 to 8 weeks
All right.
in order to get a
Incredibly long.
visa in your passport, come to the United States, which again is pretty quick
It is. It sounds.
compared to other visas. Okay. But let's back that up a little bit. Okay. So, number one, the first step when an executive contacts me, the first question I ask that when an executive contacts me about coming to the United States and we decide that the L-1 visa is going to be the most appropriate visa is I ask, do you have a business plan? Um, a lot of times they'll say, sure, we have a business plan. And I say, okay, let me take a look at it. They send it to me and it's, 5 pages uh, of, a little bit about their company and what they plan on doing. I say that's great, but you need a business plan that is prepared specifically for what the immigration service is looking for. And that's when I, for example, will almost always refer them to Joorney because my experience with Joorney has been phenomenal for the business plans. Typically, you're looking at about a 45 to 50 page document
Oh, wow.
that is well prepared, has a lot of pictures, charts, graphs, everything that an immigration officer is looking for. Okay, it describes the company in detail. It describes the U.S. company in detail, what steps have been taken to form that company, um, and then also the executive, him or herself, uh, as well as a financial forecast good for 5 years. Which, I mean, you have to understand these immigration officers uh, know nothing about your company. They know nothing about you as an executive. Even if you come from a company that's famous, okay, the Fortune 50 companies, they still probably don't know very much about it beyond what they can look up on Google. Okay. So it's very, very important to educate an immigration officer on what the company does, what the company plans on doing in the United States, and how you, as the executive, are the best person to open or run this U.S. office. And that business plan does a very, very good job of that. And a lot of times that is going to be one of, I mean, it's certainly going to be the first document that an immigration officer looks at, if not sometimes the only document. Okay. So once we've gotten past the business plan and that we prepared all of the application package. Now, an application package can typically weigh about 5 pounds. I mean, it's a sizable application because you have a lot of supporting documents about the company. So you need, for example, annual report. You need all of the formation documents of the U.S. company. Okay, that means articles of incorporation. That means registration in the United States. That means the lease of the U.S. office. And I'll take a little sidebar on that for the leasing. The U.S. government is still somewhat traditional when it comes to having a brick and mortar type of space. They want to see a U.S. office that has, even if it's a shared space like a WeWork or a Regis type of office, it's still something they want to see versus a virtual remote type of
They kind of
office
just work from the
because,
hotel.
right, it's not, they still have that kind of traditional view of how business is conducted in the United States. Now, I'm not saying that we haven't gotten approved for virtual offices
But it helps.
or remote workspaces. It's a harder sell to the government. Okay, so for example, if for example the foreign company has a remote office but is very successful based on the numbers of the annual report, multi-million dollar company, it's an easier sell than you know Joe Schmo who is in a foreign country and is working from his home and makes a couple of $100,000 a year and is looking to open a U.S. office, has no employees, none of that, doesn't have a business plan, anything. So back to, what then the time frame is. So once you have all of that prepared, and more realistically, if there's no rush to open the U.S. office, then I would say it's a good month to prepare an application package. Journey is very good at being on top of getting business plans done within, I mean, legitimately, you can have it done within a week, but I say give them a couple of weeks, 3 weeks to complete an application because it goes through multiple drafts before they fully design it. Similarly, I will send a list of documents that I need, and the client will almost always send back their first response, and there'll be several items missing from that list. So it's a back and forth for a couple of weeks of trying to get documents that maybe they're not used to providing because of U.S. laws. Sometimes they have to create documents from scratch in order to meet the eligibility requirements. Okay. So once that preparation time is done and we have everything signed, and that's another good thing with COVID is that they are now allow not for digital signatures, but for a wet signature printed out and then scanned, and you can either submit applications now online, a lot of them, but I still am kind of waiting for them to reach that phase where you can submit everything necessary. So a lot of times the paper filing is necessary.
You still have
Um,
to send the package, doesn't matter what.
right, right. And once you send that, so there's various different fees that you have to pay for. So just in April 1st, April Fool's Day, the government increased their government filing fees for the first time since 2016. And some of these fees went up substantially, in particular as it related to employment-based visas, so business visas. So typically you can be looking, first of all, you have a fraud fee of $500. That wasn't changed. That is for every first time L-1 visa.
Okay.
Okay. Extensions, those types of things, you don't have to pay the fraud fee again. Okay. Then you have an actual uh, filing fee. Okay. And the filing fee can be several $100s up to $1,300. So 695 to 1365, depending on the size of the company. If it's more than 25 employees, then you're going to be paying the 1365. If it's less, then you're going to be paying 695. Then you also have what a new fee that they introduced, what's called an asylum program fee. That for smaller companies, nonprofits, it's $300. For larger companies, more than 25, $600. And then finally, for multinational companies, this really is more for the IT world. When you have at least 50 U.S. employees and half of those or more already are foreign nationals that are in H-1B or L-1 status. That's a whopper of a fee, $4,500 right there. So that's just the regular filing,
Mm-hmm.
okay, which can take somewhere between three to up to 6 months,
Okay.
okay. Um, Whereas if you pay what's called a premium processing fee to the government, um, that has increased from $2,500 to $2,805. And what that guarantees, it used to guarantee within 15 calendar days that you receive an initial decision. Now it is 15 business days.
Mm.
Okay.
A
So
lot
really,
faster.
instead of 2 weeks, you're looking at 3 weeks. Okay. And so that's something that has changed as well. Now, what is the initial decision? Okay. Am I paying almost $3,000 to get an approval in 15 business days? No, you are paying $2,805 to get an initial decision. Now, that initial decision can very well be an approval, and it's great because you will get that initially via email, and then a week or so later, you'll get the hard copy approval notice in the mail. Take that, you go to your visa interview at the U.S. Embassy Consulate, boom, boom, you're over here, great, everybody's happy. However, the majority of time, I tell my L-1 clients to just expect it, is what is called the dreaded RFE or request for evidence. And what that means is that the government has received your documents, you paid all the proper fees, and they have reviewed it, and they say, well, we don't think you have convinced us that either the company has the connection or in particular the RFEs will focus on the executive capacity of the individual, the job duties, okay, that they're not executive enough or that they are going to be a one-man band in the United States. That is usually the first decision. Now, what frustrates a lot of immigration attorneys is the inconsistency of adjudication. I could send two exact same applications and get two very different responses.
Mm-hmm.
One could receive an RFE, the other one could be approved. One could receive an RFE, the other one could receive a notice of an intent to deny.
So what makes a difference?
More often than not, though, you're either going to get in that first decision either an approval or an RFE. The notices of intent to deny are if there's something really wrong with your case. Okay. And they still give you a chance to respond to it. It's pretty rare for them just to deny
Yeah, go ahead. Go
something
ahead.
flat out. If you receive a notice of an intent to deny, you still have a chance to respond and try to make things right. But more often than not, you will receive a notice of an intent to deny if there's something really wrong with your case. Okay. Versus an RFE, meaning that they just see a few things wrong and they want you to submit a little bit more evidence or clarify some things for them. The most frustrating RFE is one that's 6 or 15 pages long that you can just tell that the immigration officer did not review it closely at all. What happened is that they were under pressure to give you back a response within the 15
Within the 15
days.
days. Mm-hmm.
And so they just sent back what's called this template RFE. And you then have to deal with saying, look, I already provided this document in the original submission. See this enclosure. Okay. Now, keep in mind this 15-day guarantee. This is means that if the government does not respond within 15 business days, they have to give you your money back for that premium processing fee.
They don't want to do that.
They're never going to give you your money back. Okay. So they're going to respond and they'll give you an initial decision, but it may not be the initial decision that you want to hear.
No, Don, I'm fascinated about all these little details because sometimes the company think, all right, well, here's the papers, we just get an answer yes or no. There's a lot more intricate little details in between, like having the business plan and all. Now, I want to move the conversation towards like, let's say we are here already, right? We found food for our kids. I know where to go and eat the good food. Um, and eventually I fall in love with this whole idea, right? And so there's two things I want to touch into this. Like, and before we move into the idea of like, I want a green card, I want to stay, I want to bring the EB-1 as well. Like, what's that path? Or is it any connection in order to get the green card? Does it work that way, or it's just a different visa? Like, how does it work?
So, okay, first let's break down the time that you're allowed to stay
Yeah.
in L1A versus L1B. Okay. So for L1A, it's a maximum of 7 years. For L1B, it's a maximum of 5 years. And typically, there's a certain path which is not the EB-1C for L1B, and I'll touch upon
Okay.
that in a bit. For the L1A, the logical path to get a green card from an L1A is to go the EB-1C route because the requirements are essentially the same. Okay. The only difference is that it has to be a permanent job offer as opposed to a temporary job offer for the non-immigrant L1A, and the company already has to be doing business in the United States, the U.S. company, for 12 months in order to even qualify to be able to sponsor an individual for a green card under EB-1C. Now, for the L1A, typical example of opening a new office, what the government will typically do because it's a new office petition is only give that L1A individual 1 year to start off with out of the total 7 years. It's like, let's see what you can do. Their main concern is, of course, that you ultimately stay here in the United States and maybe even go on welfare. Because keep in mind that over 49% of the illegal population here in the United States, the undocumented population, came in legally. They just overstayed. Okay. Generally, it's not from the population of L1A
Right.
executives. Okay. It's usually more
Hmm.
tourists, students, these types of folks. But that being said, is that they'll only give you 1 year to start off if it's a new petition. If the office has already been in existence for at least a year and it's not a new office, they'll give you 3 years as your initial period, then two, then two. So for a total of seven, three, two, two.
All right.
Okay. For the new office, it goes one, two, two, two. Okay. So for a total of 7 years. All right. The important thing for executives is to always to make sure that they are maintaining their status. Okay. Whether or not they want to get a green card or whether they don't. Okay. And maintaining your status means that you are actually doing the work that you were hired to do. That means you are not allowed to do work with other companies
Hmm.
and freelance somewhere else. The L1 visa is employer specific, meaning that you can only work for the
That.
employer that sponsors you. Okay. Um, the other thing to keep in mind is that when you come into the United States, it used to be they used to staple what's called an I-94 card to your passport. Then they just then they just started stamping it. Okay. Now they're even doing away with that. And your I-94 status will show up online on the website cbp.gov, the Customs and Border Protection website. Understand this, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, is that when you go to the U.S. Embassy and you get your visa stamp placed into your passport, that stamp only allows you to ask permission to enter at customs. Okay. Customs and Border Protection has the final say on whether or not you enter. Now, sometimes they do pre clearance. For example, in Ireland, you do your customs interview there at the airport. Most times, though, you arrive here in the United States, and it's there that a customs officer and border protection officer is going to say, okay, we'll let you in. And then they will put into the computer how long you can stay. It is that I-94 arrival departure time that the customs officer puts in that controls your status. So even though your visa may say, okay, I have 3 years, the maximum a Customs and Border Protection officer can give you is 2 years. So you need to pay very, very close attention to that I-94 website
Mhm.
of when are you allowed to stay. Because if you go past that, that's when you run into problems for extensions, for getting a green card, for even having other immigration benefits in the future. One other thing to keep in mind when I say that you have a year here in the United States, okay, uh, and a total of 7 years. A lot of executives, they don't make the decision to stay here permanently. A lot of them want to go back, but they want to maximize that time here in the United States, those 7 years, to get the U.S. business up and running, right? And understand is that if you that 7 years is feet on U.S. ground. Okay. So let's say in 7 years, you spent every year Christmas vacation back home. You went back to visit the parent company several times during the year, even though, maybe for like a week every time. Ultimately, you can recapture, we call it, that time outside of the United States, that time abroad, and include it as part of your 7 years. Okay. So it may be from 2024 to 2031 is, the time that you're thinking, but because that you've been outside of the United States for a year total, you are actually going all the way in L-1 status till 2032.
All right, so those days basically they're still available for you. If you spend all that time away from the US, you can still sort of
Right. Just want to make sure you keep track
yeah.
of your time abroad.
Wow, well, that's very interesting in the sense that because you will have, I mean, if you're the traveler executive, you will have days that you're definitely not there. That's a very good way for. That's actually a very good benefit too.
Yeah.
So then let's start moving into for to the executives that they decided to stay, right? Like I love everything about it. I want to stay. What do I do now? Do I wait till the end of the 7 years? Do I start getting ready in the middle, or what happens?
Right. Right. Well, as I said before, a lot of times executives and their families fall in love with the United States and they make that decision as a family, as an individual, that, I want to stay here permanently. And so when I talk about a green card, it actually is a card that is green. It's used to be pink for several years, but it's a green card, and that is essentially evidence of your permanent resident status. Okay. Now, when I talk about permanent resident status, what I mean is that you are here in the United States living permanently. Okay. And what that means is that you need to be in a 12-month period, at least 6 total months in the United States. Now, an L-1 visa holder, the executive may, they may only spend 4 total months in the United States because they're
Yep.
traveling, they're meeting clients, all of these things. That's perfectly fine. But as a permanent resident, if you do that, you better talk to an
Accountability.
attorney to be able to get what's called a reentry permit so that you don't lose your green card after spending all this money and trying to get it.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, but as far as the other thing that is the advantage of a green card is that your children will age out of your L status, dependent status at the age of 21. So a lot of times people will come here, executives will come here with maybe teenage kids, uh, kids. Sometimes they'll even have children here. If you have children here, they're automatically U.S. citizens, being born in the United States. But a lot of times the consideration for a green card is that, look, my kid's going to be graduating high school. They're going to want to go to college here in the United States, and they age out at 21. So let's get them on a status that they can stay here and study and live and work. Because as a green card holder, you can work with any employer. Okay. And that's one of the things that I tell US employers when they're considering sponsoring an executive is that, let's say that you sponsor Marcos as an executive here in the United States. Once he gets that green card, he's not obligated to work with you
Free.
anymore. He's free. Exactly. You can take whatever job you want. Now, I don't recommend you do so for at least 6 months after you get the green card because then they're like, it could be considered fraudulent that you knew you were going to take another job. But essentially, yes, you have that freedom. And just to back up as well on the dependents, one of the very, very nice things about the L1 is that your spouse, and this also works with homosexual spouses, that you are allowed to work as the spouse of an L visa holder. It used to be that you would have to come into the United States, and a lot of these folks, they have their own professions, right? So when you're uprooting them from France, let's say, and they had a great job in France, they come here and they're going to twiddle their thumbs at the house for 24 hours a day. A lot of them don't want to do that. So what the spouse will do, it used to be required, is that they would come into the United States, apply for employment authorization, and have to wait 8 months in order to be
Don't
authorized to
worry,
work.
man.
Now they've changed it for both spouses of E visa holders and L visa holders, is that the spouse can work incident to status, meaning that upon arrival into the United States, they just have to show their L2 visa to a U.S. employer, and they can work with any U.S. employer. They can work part-time, they can work full-time, they can work 5 jobs, they don't have to work at all.
They have the
It's
freedom.
really a very nice freedom. The kids as L2 dependents, so L1 family is L2. L2 visa holders, they can only go to school. They're not authorized to work.
All right.
Okay. So until they get their own employment authorization somehow. But
Not even
once we've
small jobs, right?
decided,
Not even like I don't know, like working in a mall or in the fast food.
I mean, the reality, Marcus, is that a lot of times, a kid maybe wants to do a babysitting job or, mow yards or
Yeah.
something like that. Technically, they're not supposed to. Is immigration going to come and throw them out of the country for doing that? Probably unlikely. They just don't have the resources to find all the babysitters of the world. Now, but if you go to McDonald's, they're going to require to flip burgers. and make a little extra cash in high school, they're going to ask for an employment authorization document. And if you can't provide that,
You're not
they
gonna
won't
get it. Yeah.
hire you. Okay. So to get back to the actual decision, okay, we've decided that we want to stay here permanently. How do we do that? Okay. So the very first thing is let's take it from an L-1B because that'll be the easiest to talk about. The L-1B, remember, is a specialized
Hmm.
knowledge worker. Okay, not necessarily an executive or a manager or anything like that. All right, they have brought over some type of knowledge specialized to that company, and they're bringing it to the United States to help the U.S. company. All right, the U.S. subsidiary, partner, affiliate, branch, whatever. As I said before, the EB-1C3 green card option is not going to be an option for them because, at least traditionally, because you have to show that you were a manager or an executive outside of the United States, but also here in the United States. And, although maybe sometimes they may be titled manager, like project manager or something like that, they're not really a manager in the sense of L1A type of director. Okay, specialized knowledge. They are really working with a very specific type of thing. All right. So what I recommend to L1B visa holders is they do it exactly like H1B visa holders to get a green card. Is that they go through the Department of Labor perm labor certification process, and if they pass that, and what the labor certification process is essentially a U.S. company is testing the U.S. market to see if there are U.S. workers available for that position. That's usually pretty tough when it's a specialized knowledge worker because, you generally had to have worked for that company
To
to
understand.
gain that specialized knowledge in the first place, okay? So they can either go the EB-2 route or the EB-3. Now, when I say EB, just for folks at home, EB means employment based, okay? So there are 5 different categories of employment based sponsorship. We'll talk about in a bit here about EB-1. So the first preference category, 1 being first. EB-2 means the second preference category, and EB-3 means the third preference category. EB-4 is for religious workers, EB-5 are for investors. So we're not going to talk about those. But EB-2 requires that the U.S. company have a job that requires at least a master's degree or a bachelor's degree plus 5 years of experience to do. An EB-3 job, green card job, is one that just requires a bachelor's degree. Okay. So it really is a question of evaluating the individual who's here on an L1B, talking with the company, seeing what's going to work best for them. Okay. Usually it's going to be EB-2. Okay. Because you gain specialized knowledge by working a long time with the company, you see. So that being said, we'll leave that there. Let's talk about the EB-1C application. And so there's different EB-1 employment-based first preference categories. There's EB-1A, which is for extraordinary individuals. A lot of times it's going to be academics. EB-1B also a lot of academics there. But these are people of extraordinary ability. You also see, for example, EB-1A, Nobel Prize winners, Olympic gold medalists, these types of things.
All right, so it's really high up.
EB-1C, yeah, you really have to show I mean, there's certain requirements for it, but you really have to show that what you're going to be doing is that you have the qualifications, that you fall in that first preference category of people that we want here permanently in the United States, or at least the government wants permanently in the United States. Okay. EB-1C, you're talking about multinational executives. Okay. And the requirements, as I mentioned before, are very similar to the L-1A in the sense that you have to have been working for at least a year in the last 3 years with the foreign company. Okay. You have to actually be an executive or manager. You can't be a one-man band. Okay. You have to have people working under you. And I typically recommend at least 4 to 7 people.
Okay, but
Okay.
is
As
there
a
an
minimum.
actual minimum, or in your experience you've
No,
seen it?
there's not an
Okay,
actual minimum requirement. I mean, I've been successful only having one employee, but
it's
it's a
hard.
tough sell. The more employees you have, the better. And really, when talking to L1A executives, what I like to see is a record of hiring and firing. If you've got your name on 100 hires and 20 fires, you're an executive.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Um, they're not going to argue that. All right. If you've only got a couple of workers that you recently hired, whether they be US or not, it's going to be hard for an immigration officer to say, yeah, they qualify as an executive. Okay. The one difference with the EB-1C green card application and the L-1A non-immigrant temporary application is that it must be a permanent job interview, a permanent job offer, excuse me, versus a temporary job offer, because the L1 non-immigrant is here only for 7 years, okay, before they have to go back home. One thing to note is that if you've done 7 years here in L1A status, you leave for a year, you can renew, you can start over that 7 years, you can get a new 7 years. Same with H-1B. If you do 6 years in H-1B status, leave the country, come back in, you get a new 6 years available. Okay. That's just a side note. But that being said, the main thing is that you want to have the U.S. company be in business for at least 12 months. So the way that it typically works is that at L1A, the foreign company, the board gets together with their executives and they say, okay, we need to send somebody to open the U.S. office. Okay, let's get uh, Roger, okay, from France over here to run it. His English is pretty good. He went to school in California for a year. He should be able to run the U.S. office. Okay, he's the director of sales, so he can make a bunch of sales for us in the United States. Now, salespeople a lot of times don't have administrative qualities of running an actual business. You need to have somebody that to open a U.S. office that knows how to run a business and also be your salesperson on the ground, which is a unique individual. But let's say Roger comes over here and he does a great job, okay? And they will have him run that U.S. business for a year and start it up brand new from the ground up. If he wants to stay, you've already got a year in your belt of running the U.S. office, and it meets the EB-1C requirements of being in business for at least a year. So what we'll do is we'll extend him for 2 years, okay, so that he's maintaining his status. But in that time, we will apply for the green card, okay, because the green card typically takes total About a year, 6 months, 8 months
Okay.
to a year
So
to
that's the
process.
longest one,
Okay.
right? That's the
And
longest one it will take.
right. And understand they do have premium processing that they just opened up recently for a couple of different kinds of green cards. Okay. And that is in the sense that if you apply, you can ultimately apply using premium processing and get a decision within 45 days. Okay. But I think from a timing perspective, what I generally tell people to realistically expect is about 8 months to a year from the time that we apply for a green card until the time that they actually have an interview, which they are interviewing people now to make sure that this is the person that is on the paper and that the person knows what they're talking
And
about as far as doing the
and that's
job.
why you plan it
A
with that
lot of
much
times the
time.
interviews are waived. Yeah. But, I mean, it adds time to the process. And that's why, when they first started doing it a few years ago, they realized, oh no, we've got all these marriage based green cards that we have to interview. We have all these asylum people we have to interview. Now we have this whole group of executives. So a lot of times they'll just waive the interview. Okay. But, essentially during that process, your status as L1A remains unchanged. Now, to back up, let's think about a couple of things. Just, from a reality standpoint. How do I travel while I'm undergoing a green card process? The nice thing about L and H visas is that they are the only two visas that allow for what is called dual intent. I mean, immigration really, Marcus, is all about what's in your mind when you come to the Customs and Border Protection Officer. Are you going to be here temporarily? Do you have a ticket back home? Do you have a home back home? Do you have family back home? Do you have a job back home? Remember that 49% number that I talked about of people coming
Oh,
in
I
legally and just
I've
overstaying.
been there, done
Okay.
that many times.
Yeah. And they look at you critically. They're pretty suspicious and they're well trained to see if you're lying or not. Um, so, in the sense that when you're coming to the United States, for the majority of visas, you have to prove that you're going to go back to your country of origin, whether that be ESTA, whether it
Mhm.
be 98% of the visas. With the L visa, you can come in the very first day and say, "Yeah, I'm going to go for a green card. That's 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 my plan," and they have to let you in. Okay, it in the sense that if you apply, let's take that E visa, the treaty visa that I was talking about for many executives from 35 different countries or so. If they come in, they apply for a green card because remember, I don't know if you are aware, but E visas are good for up to 5 years and can be renewed indefinitely, forever. Okay. I have clients that are here 25 years on their E visas. They don't want to go for a green card because if they leave the US while their green card application is pending and they try to come back in on the E visa, they won't be allowed back in.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So that's a nice point of flexibility for the L visa to go for the green card. Okay. Really, that's one of the major things that people think about because the green card process can take so long is, am I going to be stuck here in the United States without being able, let's say, grandma gets sick or, I have a business emergency or something like that. So with the L visa, it is certainly allowed to travel back and forth as much as you want while your green card is processing. Now, you've got your green card. As I said, you should continue working for the
For
company
the 6 months.
for at least
Hmm.
6 months so as to avoid any appearance of fraud. which could come up later on at your U.S. citizenship interview if that's something that you decide. Um, but the green card itself, the benefits of going with EB-1C are great because you don't have a labor certification, meaning that you don't have to waste 2 years with the Department of Labor proving that there is no other U.S. citizen. You don't have the costs involved with a recruitment campaign, putting in ads in newspapers and these types of things. You can get a green card for yourself as the executive, your spouse, and your unmarried children under 21. And once you have that green card, you can work for any employer, and it's good typically for 10 years, and start getting time to go for U.S. citizenship if that is something that you decide. But of course, that's for another seminar.
No, I mean, I have a list of many other things that we're going to talk another time with the EB2 and EB3 and all of this incredible amount of visas. So let's sort of start rounding up the whole idea. Let's close, especially from what I understood, right? So it's definitely the best idea to start with your L1 visa. It's good to connect also with chambers of commerce from your country so you can adapt to the new country as well. If you're thinking of the green card, start applying while you still have your L and make sure that you have enough time to do both at the same time, right? Any other key advice that you
Indeed.
feel that for applicants is something that is been a must for you, something that you've seen that you better do this, yes or yes?
Well, I would say just based on 23 years of dealing with executives and the RFEs, the requests for evidence from the government through their inconsistent adjudication, is that one, you should plan accordingly, meaning that there can really be no firm expected deadlines. Okay. If somebody says to me, I want to have my visa interview in 2 weeks, I'll say, well, okay, great. That's what you may want, but whether or not that's going to happen is a completely different story. So there has to be some flexibility involved. And, of course, as an executive, you're used to kind of getting your way. And so it's a question of being flexible and understanding is that immigration is the great equalizer. You may be a big boss in your country of origin, but for immigration, you're just another executive. Okay. Um, the other thing I think that is very helpful for executives to know when going into this, whether it be a company opening a U.S. office, new, or sending an executive for the first time to the United States. As I said, it does take a fairly unique individual to be able to juggle the culture shock, to be able to administer the new office, hire and fire correct people, and to ultimately make the U.S. office a success. So choose wisely. Be deliberate in that type of choice. Okay. Um, and then finally, from an application standpoint, what's probably the most important beyond the financials and beyond the business plan, which is really such a critical document for purposes of this visa application, as many other employment-based visa applications. I mean, I always go to Joorney for purposes of non-immigrant or green card applications. Is essentially you need to be very clear about explaining what your executive duties were abroad, and this could be point by point and break it down by percentage with organizational charts the people underneath you, the direct and indirect hires, have their resumes, their education, their job duties, their job title, their salaries to show that you truly are an executive. But you also do that for the United States. Okay. And, when you're opening a new US office, you don't have anybody there, which is why, again, a business plan becomes so critical. Um, but that being said, I think really educating an immigration officer who knows nothing about your company and nothing about you, don't expect them to see CEO or vice president of whatever and think, okay, well, let's just approve this guy. So I think really being well prepared, flexible, and deliberate will help you succeed as a multinational executive coming to the United States.
That's that final piece of advice. I think is invaluable. I mean, having that flexibility is special because, like you mentioned, there are a lot of visas that it takes a while, and there will maybe missing papers, things that you have to bring it back up. So that I love that part. Like, doesn't matter how big of a CEO you are back in your country. Here, just another applicant. So take it easy. Don, with all that being said, I just want to thank you one more time. I know we have tons of other things to talk about, so we're going to plan more material together. Thank you for all of this. I learned tons. I'm sure people at home learn even more. Thank you again. People at home, if you have any other questions, we're going to add all of Don's details as well with the LLM group. You know where to find us at Joorney if you have any questions about your business plans and feasibility project, basically whatever you want to know about making this happen. And don't forget just to subscribe to our channel to be always aware of all the intrinsic things that you need to know about the process of going to the US or Canada. So again, Don, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thank you, Marcus.